No history required. Nobody came here to hear that. I think maybe I'll just start with the first conversation you guys had coming in from Australia and Brazil around the world. And some of the last ones, what I note on is everybody has to just customize the business to what you're doing. The great generalities are completely useless. I mean, almost everything we read is about retail and doesn't even apply to most of the fleet business. The incentives, the policies, the jurisdictions that you work or live in Australia or Brazil and Mercosur or San Bernardino in the district there or Bakersfield where good old Dan and Joe Hay are with their Joburg Ford. It doesn't really matter until it gets to you. You might have all take-home vehicles, and that's your charging problem, and maybe they're all Class 8 or Class 5, and the other guy's driving passenger cars as his fleet. To me, that's the biggest takeaway. The other one I had just coming out of here today and through the week is we all dabble. It's just as bad in every company. Somebody wants a pilot to try something and to show somebody else are doing, whoever it is, your customers, about people who are using the vehicles or the people that you work for, we're doing something. We're doing something with telematics or software, GPS, or charging or this or that. But what I saw more and more, if the pilot isn't intended to scale to something, don't even bother. It's just all a great big waste of time. When I was working with you guys in New York, obviously big scale, big plans, but the intention was long term. So yeah, it might not work. Mach-E's as police cars, maybe, maybe not. And you learn what is going to work. But the intent is, I'm going all the way. Henry Ford didn't make billions of dollars because he made really the world's best car. He made a lot of them at scale. And we were talking scale last night, and that's the other thing. I think learning where the scale is going to come from in the future, that is important. If the retail guy is not going to be in the business, trying to get your little bit of fleet thing to last as that percentage of the total is really, really hard. And if they're not in it for the long term, they're coming out. Where are the charging guys? I was shocked. I was at Move America recently at the conference. You know, where's the list full of chargers, everybody here to come and sell you chargers? It's totally different.
We'll get them back next year, I guess.
Next year.
But the turnover, I mean, let's face it, Ted, I've made this comment before. It's a reality. The amount of swag that I have from businesses that are no longer in business fills a trunk in my house. It's pretty good swag. It was bought with venture capital money, but this is a real issue and a real question mark for fleets, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the fleet business and B2B is so different than retail, having done both. You know, if you're going to try an EV, you try it, maybe you lease it for 3 years, not even worried about the warranty because it's pretty much all covered. That's not the case when you have to maintain it over a life cycle for the same people and you have a lot of people depending on you. And as they say, the fear of loss is 3 times the amount of opportunity to gain. So you're going to get fired if all the people using your vehicles aren't properly working their job from above or the side.
So we're going to talk tariffs, supply chain. We're going to talk a little bit more about electrification and the realities there and really what is software-defined vehicles. We're going to get into a lot of stuff that we've already certainly talked about, but it's going to be from Ted's perspective. And certainly about vehicle and design trends. But let's go with tariffs and supply chains. I mean, what's your view on how tariffs are really affecting the market right now?
You guys know, and all of you guys are dealing with it as well, it's a daily surprise. And that is really bad in an industry with long time frames. You have a whole bunch of people waiting on product decisions because they're trying to figure out, well, should I resupply from China to Mexico, Mexico to here? What will be the MCA rule changes on Mexico and Canadian content by the end of the year? And I just listened to the Ford call right before on earnings a couple minutes ago, and they came in $1 billion lower on tariffs than they thought because of the latest change in the rebate. So it's only $1 billion this year instead of $2 billion. But that's all just putting a great big pause in decisions because your supply guys are trying to figure out tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the whole system is waiting, which is just going to cause disruption, product delays. And if you throw that on the unclear emissions environment, it just means a lot of people are paralyzed.
So you just touched on supply chains. I mean, they seemingly stabilized post-pandemic, but that's what you're talking about, right? The tier ones, tier twos, that's where the pain's going to be.
But I was just talking to a CEO of one of the tier ones. They have the parts in, let's say, F-150, but many other brands as well. And that person has represented many suppliers in the past. They're getting twisted and turned. They also are trying to deal with tariffs. Should we be supplying or not? They're getting twisted on what will be the demand for hybrids and the various ranges of emissions vehicles. And they can't switch over that fast, and they're all quick. And the industry is still very fragile. In our case, aluminum fires. In others, the chips coming out of Europe, which is still, it's going to be a close call if action's not taken on those new chips. So there's a lot of weakness in the supply chain, and when it is looking at a different mix, and the system is all asking from different mixes of products from the manufacturers, especially a switch back to ICE only in the U.S., that's going to cause a lot of disruption.
Would that cause companies to be conservative on producing like parts, for instance, and then cause a shortage of parts that was going to drive fleets crazy?
Well, the suppliers were already nervous about the OEM projections on EVs pre the change. So they didn't believe the OEM calls anyway, which was a constant source of challenge on both sides. So now it's going to be swing back the other way, which will be another source of challenge as a lot of the people are going to remix to less constrained internal combustion engines.
Yeah, actually, well, let's just skip down here too, because I think this electrification elephant and some of the uncertainties in the market have caused some interesting developments in design and vehicle design. I mean, the pace of design changes seems to have slowed, right? I mean, like we were talking yesterday in a session how the refreshes they're minimal, actually. I haven't seen a lot of new models come out, new ICE models certainly. I guess we know why, but why is that, and how is that? Will that change moving forward?
I think in the U.S. again, we can talk the global picture where it's going to be very different, but in the U.S., yeah, there was a pause. There was a lot of money, and you can see the write-offs at various companies in the OEMs on their EV assets. There was a great push towards EVs for a whole bunch of reasons, including consumer demand, corporate demand for sustainability, and that is definitely tailing off here. And because now all the assets have to be replanted from battery plants, assembly plants that were tuned for battery electric vehicles to lower scale growth rates or no growth rates depending on the particular segment, it's all going to move to internal combustion. And in the medium, they've got to come up with more internal combustion plans than they were planning to do originally. And others who completely walked away from hybrids are trying, well, if the country's not ready for battery electric, I want to move back to hybrids. Some companies said we're not going to be in the hybrid business, and it takes time to get back into the hybrid business.
Well, it does take time to get back in the hybrid business. I mean, but we see how they are the most popular vehicles on the market, and yet there would be hesitancy by manufacturers to, are we really going to dive in that business because we think that it's still a bridge technology?
I think the debate has changed as the politics have changed. I think this goes back to the question, what will be the new curve? And this is where they say, never let a catastrophe or one of these problems go to waste. There will be a great thinning of companies. Yeah. We will still have more EVs because the rest of the world is still going to have a lot of EVs. But scale matters. And in the U.S., we're trying to localize scale. A lot of that scale takes time. Putting in new mines to get them running is a long process. It's not a couple weeks. And so to get that change, and I see in the investment analysts a lot when I used to run investor relations, so I follow all the guys closely in the auto industry and how they report on. There's a lot of comparisons versus Germany. So all of us remember who covered Europe, and same for me when I was having the commercial e-transit and the rest of the vehicles there. Germany lopped off the incentives in September of 23, and there was a big pull ahead, as there always is, like the Netherlands when they had their changes, or France. And there was a big dive after. And so a lot of people are saying, well, Germany is the US model. We'll have a big change here in September this year here, no 7,500. Although in the fleet business, nobody was really getting the $7,500 unless you were state and local government. Everybody else couldn't apply for it anyways because they already had other tax strategies. So it really didn't matter to fleet as much anyway. But then it was going to all drop up just like Germany and it'll come back. Yeah, but Germany still has CO2 requirements, all the manufacturers in Europe. And even with this new slope plow provision of 25, 6, 7, that you can make it up later. I said, well, you can't make it up later. I'm going to take a pause on EV sales and suddenly sell more the next 2 years. That's not going to happen. And the whole charging infrastructure and the investment to support that. And Germany faces the problems we're going to have with the kilowatt cost going up and had because of the war. Well, we have a different problem where the kilowatt costs are going up for a whole variety of reasons, and by the time the data centers go in, a lot more.
Well, we had talked about that. I mean, what do you see the electricity prices going up and staying up, or do you see them moderating? Or, I mean, because demand for electricity is going through the roof, particularly with the data centers.
So as you look at what's going on today, there's no question the kilowatt cost for residential and commercial in the U.S. is going up. Here in California, well, it was already high compared to the nation. It's been going up at a 3% clip. It's supposed to go up another 4% in the next couple of years. But a lot of the data center structure, the capacity is going in, so it's starting to come into the rate tables, but it hasn't hit yet. 27 is where you really start to see some numbers coming in. So it's coming. And it's a lot more predictable because you got to go ask rate players and utilities to go pay versus crude where there's a lot of WTI incentives to take fuel prices down in that direction, but a lot more volatility like this week's sanctions on what the price will be.
Sure. So electrification, I mean, where adoption progress, I mean, in sedans and passenger cars, it seems to work. I mean, we can even talk about fleets, right? I mean, you know, if you got a vehicle that does 300 miles, an electric vehicle that does 300 miles, that would seem to work. You charge it home and you move on. It's going to be part of our lifestyle incrementally, I think, and particularly in fleets. And then I think in Class 2B, cargo vans, I mean, the premium for an E-Transit, a ProMaster EV, is not that much. You can make it up on paying a little bit less for charging, I think. I mean, we saw that curve there in a presentation a couple days ago that it is cheaper to run. But where do you think the progress is going to be with EVs?
Well, there's a whole long discussion. I think in the space for those of you who got, let's say, vans and pickups, I'm not even go to Class 5 or Super Duty chassis or something like that. Again, user beware, know your business. Yes, there are calculators out there. We have one. Utilities have various. But the input models are not so easy. So first of all, in the passenger vehicles, it's all kind of EPA range or WLTP in Europe. That is, as we all know in the business, it's a fixed cycle over a fixed temperature and doesn't represent pretty much anything. Real usage may vary. Highway speed, cold, etc. Once it becomes vans and pickups and you're pushing a lot through the air, then it really matters. You're losing 20% for sure, cum on the both, and especially on the cold side if you're not pre-charging and warming up the battery. So, and the cost for fleet installations of charging is way higher even for all applications, level 2 chargers or DC. Not that most of the people I see need DC unless they're huge. It costs a lot more than residential on the installation side than it does so if you just throw in the cost of a charger, you've got the wrong number. So by the time you do all the math, there are many applications where it makes great sense. There are many applications as it doesn't. I remember a guy, we had one customer of transit in somewhere in northern Canada. He's like, I'm not getting the range I'm supposed to get in the dealer, of course. Sold it to him anyway. He was a van it was doing window replacement. So he had 2 racks of windows on the van. Okay, it was like carrying a parachute. In winter, not ideal.
Sure. Well, speaking of charging, I mean, opening up the Tesla superchargers is probably is a good thing, I think, obviously, for reliability's sake. But, I mean, how do we have to scale that to make it really work for the general public and for fleets? Well, let's put it this way. For fleets, if you're charging using public charging, you're not doing something right, I think.
I think from my standpoint, this is where Chinese policy in all its layers helped. You know, when I was running the first wave of Ford's electric vehicles, so T-Medicine for Maki, Lightning, and E-Transit, we were going to China 3 to 5 times a year pre-COVID. And my last trip was last March there, driving a lot of cars and visiting stores. So first of all, I think that yesterday we had this slide on the DC charging rate. So the first was the highway provision to have all the 50 kilowatt chargers in China. So it was going in, and you'll remember, I can't remember the 3 charging companies at the time, but there were chargers everywhere, and it was 2017, 18. So by policy, you had the license plates, as you mentioned, or the costs and the challenges. And what's interesting, and you can always see where policy has the difference, where Norway, where big taxes on ICE vehicles, no taxes on EVs. China, where you had didn't have commercial vehicles like our partner GMC on vans and pickups. There weren't any restrictions, or very few, going into the cities with a license plate thing for very, very many years. And so the electrification of pickups and vans in China is way behind passenger cars, still lagging by a lot. And those cars are awesome now because there's so much scale on the Chinese side. Here, we don't have internet highway charging by mandate, or very few funding options, less now, mainly on the public side. We still have to move from 400 volt to 800 volts to get faster charging speeds. Everybody's still moving over to NACS or NACS. There's a lot still coming and a lot of change on the vehicles to make the charging work for anybody in public charging. Although again, in fleet applications, I always try to say, if you need public charging, then EVs are not for you unless you have to. California or state and local here, something like that.
Yeah, fair enough. So this term software-defined vehicles, I mean, you know, computers on wheels, certain things you're always going to need an axle. What does that actually really mean, and what's the promise of a software-defined vehicle?
I think that's part of the problem in the industry is going from, and we talked about some of the software-derived vehicles in China, many. The Chinese nascent guys versus the legacy OEMs, it is a cell phone on wheels. It is a platform of software architecture where all the modules and the data is available, moving fast to write code, to create features, improve quality and everything else, and make over-the-air updates as required. Versus the legacy OEMs that not only had to move from internal combustion. Frankly, I think moving internal combustion to battery electric is easier than becoming a software-defined vehicle. You have 80 modules on the vehicle, you've got your door module and your lamp modules and all across the vehicle that were all done by independent suppliers on a network that was primarily meant to keep the vehicle only operating while the vehicle was on to continue operation. Lights on, lights off, door open, door not open. Not to store data about how many times the door was opened, nest that with other activities in the vehicles to integrate features. To create that whole electrical architecture with a software layer on top to develop features at pace and make those rapid changes is a completely different supplier, software platform, and capability. And very difficult to migrate from one to the other. And then you get to do OTAs and quality and engineering improvements, faster production, better learning.
Sure. What percentage of recalls do you think could be satisfied by OTAs moving forward?
Well, I think as Kumar Galhotra was just on the call, and he said, well, yes, Ford has some recalls, but some recalls are mandated recalls like Tesla had in the past as well, which can be solved 100% by software. That wasn't happening even 5 years ago.
I'm going to ask you about cybersecurity. And, you know, there's one thing with Chinese vehicles that may or may not be an overblown worry, but a software-defined vehicle can get hacked. I mean, do you see the threat, the cybersecurity issue as being, you know, how do you rate it in terms of hot, cool, as a problem moving forward?
Cybersecurity is a top problem for everybody in any kind of business or personal life. It affects, in our business, the massive outage you guys might remember from the dealer management system a year or so ago. From dealers out, suppliers out. There are so many incidents all the time, and a vehicle that is software driven, and it happens to the best of the cell manufacturers as well, that there are breakthroughs that come into the vehicles, whether it's the cloud layer or the different layers of the architecture, and they're entering at different layers. And with bad AI actors, of that becoming easier every single day, that is going to keep every person in every facility, robots in the plants, everywhere else, up all the time.
For sure. Let's talk about ADAS and the path to autonomy, which we had just discussed, actually. Really take it from your point of view, and let's start with the current state of ADAS systems and what they're able to do and not able to do. I mean, there's obviously there's FSD, there's Blue Cruise, Super Cruise. How do you see that market developing?
Well, I think the key thing for fleet companies is, well, what's it doing for me? You're going to pay for the extra sensors. You got to go align them. If you've got service bodies, it's really not even much you can do at all because it's not set for that. I think the main thing is, as the insurance data comes out better, that you can make that call of how many accidents am I avoiding, how many backup issues am I having, how many insurance claims that were not founded in reality by pedestrians, especially happening in certain countries. That shield of information to protect the driver and the asset and be able to link with data. Here's real data that says it's worth the investment to protect my fleet, my drivers, and my team. I think that's where it really makes sense. And I think a lot of that data is starting to come out now. It wasn't really that great or held closely in the insurance industry, but I think that more and more that data is going to become available. And I think more and more for fleets themselves, you have your telematics data, and as you're integrating that data, which should be all structured from the previous comment, I can't remember the guy who said data structured, you get your data organized. That is critical. But if your data is organized, you too should be able to see, I have equipped or non-equipped vehicles, and if I'm at scale, these are producing better results for me and my team.
Sure. Another design thing, do you see, there's some alcohol, I know this is a very specific topic, but alcohol detection is becoming a thing. And there are systems out there now. Do you see those developing as like OE spec?
Yep, I've seen it off and on. I'm never sure why it wasn't, I'm still curious why it wasn't adopted on the legislative side or the OEM side, which just makes me say there's something about the science on statistically that maybe it's not clear enough.
Yeah.
It kind of sounds like an FDA type thing. I'm not sure who the managing body would be, if it's a NHTSA thing or an FDA thing in this country or others. But because you haven't seen it that I know of anywhere in the world, maybe even in Europe where the fines are so heavy, something about it says to me that the data is not there. It's one of the reasons, and I think this having the always on data, I mean, who in the room has an Apple phone or watch or some system? So we all want the integrated data. We all hate adding another set of systems to it. This fragmented data, which is why you want your data structured. But one of the reasons for the watch, and when I upgraded iOS 25. Why? Because it did two things. It had the sleep score, and I wasn't going to buy another device or a ring my wife has for $500. Who needs another device? But two, because it has the FDA approved blood pressure levels. And it wasn't before, and so, okay, there's an all-new feature that I would upgrade for the watch for, or I can do, and this is what a lot of fleets do, or I can do it like going to the doctor once a year. How's your blood pressure? One time per year. They go in and they check. That's scientific, whereas something that's monitoring all the time. That is the difference between fleet, telematics, and knowing that your data, your system is, and the complete randomness of a once-a-year physical check.
Yeah, how do you see... You mentioned Ring, and that reminds me of like Ring, the doorbell thing, and the, how we're in this connected ecosystem that you mentioned.
I think of that all the time. For me, those are the closest parallel is your home. What people don't get when they're not using what is available to them from telematics, right? And pretty soon all the cameras will be integrated because the cars, even if the legacy guys are slower than the all-new ones, you're still going to get those cameras integrated into the vehicle and those signals. Today, they're kind of trapped for one application for that supplier for whatever they were doing. And so many times you can't integrate them to create systemic benefits for other applications. That is going to rapidly change over the next few years. And for me, it's kind of like a house. You could get a house, you put in a modem into it, well, nothing happens. You put a modem in your vehicle and you don't connect it to anything, who cares? But you put it in a Ring camera and it's checking on the front door, robbers, problems, visits, packages. During COVID, true story, I was sitting there with a Ring camera, it goes off. The U.S. Post Office person ran into the front of my house. Massive damage. Left, and if it wasn't for Ring, we wouldn't have known. You have that, you have Sonos, you have your sprinkler system, you have your Nest. Of course it makes sense to heat some rooms, turn them off, change it when you're on vacation, adjust it to the pattern of the room digitally. Sprinkler systems that turn off with weather, not. Cost saves, opportunities, and sustainability all over the place. And that's what the telematics and the software suites are doing.
Sure. Let's talk big picture. And
Bigger picture.
Big picture, yeah. Bring in Wall Street, bring in where the money is flowing. And you're close to the market, to analysts and investors. I mean, how are they looking at OEM strategies? I mean, we're in another pivot. We had a pivot 3 years ago, and now we're in another kind of pivot back. But how does Wall Street view all this?
The auto business is a tough business. If you look at other investment opportunities in the marketplace, it is a tough business that is heavily regulated with very long time frames and a lot of fixed assets. In many ways, not ideal. And there is a lot of pressure on the incumbents in the United States, which will be in a more closed market, it looks like, to the traditional European manufacturers facing steep CO2 curves, massive Chinese competition, and constant regulations for improvements in safety, et cetera. There's a lot of challenge in the auto space currently. So in this region, they're going to be looking for profit optimization in a more emissions-friendly environment. And you can see from both sides the outlook of that happening. You can see the EV-only companies saying, we expect to have less earnings from credits. And you see the other side saying, we expect to pay less for credits. We expect to optimize for to what the customers want, which could be interesting, fun engines that were being slowly constrained. And a lot of that money will flow accordingly because that is the money to be made in this region. And in Europe, we'll continue to have a very, very difficult environment because the CO2 requirements are very steep, and it's sometimes a tough proposition to put them in the vehicle.
I mean, we're still making profits on trucks, right? I mean, that's like
we are. Trucks were already heavily protected.
Yeah, and they will continue to be the big profit centers, I would imagine.
They will. The one great thing about American trucks is they don't fit in other countries. You don't see a lot of F-150s in Rome.
Yeah, this is true. Looking even bigger picture, okay, what is the promise and the threat for incumbent automakers in a global market that now includes some pretty big Chinese players and other disruptions going on?
Well, I agree with both Ryan and Leo. The Chinese are very formidable competitors. I'm sure you see them all the time in Australia, no tariff barriers from anywhere in the world. They are very strong competitors. These are software-defined EV vehicles with beautiful designs on the inside. Zeekr and the Geelys and the BYDs of the world, there are many. And even though what will still happen in China, despite many, many cars, it's like many of the other things, it's like Waymo. It's great for you to pay that, but they're losing money. And that's because they're growing to a better future. But there's most of the Chinese companies, except two, I believe, are losing money. So there will be a great thinning out, as there are in many businesses, but that doesn't mean they're not making great cars. For the people driving the cars, it's wonderful. Lots of choice, lots of competitive pressure, and the thinning will come. And this again becomes for the fleet as you are investing new technology, is the one you're betting on the one going to get thinned out? That is a problem if you spend your time, equipment, learning into the company that isn't there to last, because your businesses need to last. And there's no point doing a pilot to scale when the pilot disappears when you're ready to scale and you've learned the lessons.
What would be the tipping point for Chinese autos to be sold here? What has to happen?
I think there is a lot of sino tension regardless on both sides of the aisle. Yeah. So I don't see that one changing from a political sense anytime soon. There is a tension there, and I would expect the tension to continue, whoever is running the show.
Yeah, and that would be the biggest
That'd be a bit. I mean, the ecosystems are different. Obviously, they do the whole system of Alibaba, Baidu, and the rest are a different platform of interaction in models anyway, even the style and colorization of the way they present information in the vehicle. And as the vehicles become more and more AI, I'm a huge AI user at home for everything, contracts, quotations, my Dungeons and Dragons work, everything. They're going to use it, and like Xiaomi, one of the first things they did, like many things in China, was a stunt, but to say, hey, look, here's natural language and usage in the vehicle when you're trying to get things. The same thing that Tesla's doing with Grok in the vehicle is, hey, let's make this an integrated experience, a natural language to get what you want in a simple way versus trying to figure it out.
All right, a couple of look-ahead questions, and then we have some time for questions from the audience. So your take on the biggest shifts, what should fleets be preparing for in the next 5 years?
EVs will continue, that's for sure. The kind of EVs in the marketplace may move around a bit on the passenger side. That makes it very tricky if you're in the van and pickup business. I think it's going to be an interesting place to watch. And what would happen is, because where opportunity on the cost goes is where the scale goes. And if the scale is not going into, in EVs is going into pickups and that size vehicles or up, then they're going to be expensive. And for those of you that have to do it, let's say in California or certain communities where it is a mandate, you're going to have to just bite the bullet to get the optimal solution. Here's my optimal charging, here's my optimal product solutions to get the job done, because I have to serve my customers first.
Okay, let's just look out even closer to, let's just say, a year and a half from now. What does that normal look like? What does that environment look like for OEMs and for fleets? Are we moving to a period of stabilization? I mean, here we came out of the pandemic and we thought, okay, great, we got through the supply chain stuff, and now we have this tariff issue. But what does it look like a year from now?
I don't think it's going to be that stable. And for a couple of reasons. Tariffs, my experience of when I'm living in Argentina or Brazil or Venezuela, Turkey, and Russia, when you had systemic shocks in the exchange rate or the economy, and you have rapid inflation in a very short amount of time, very familiar with that multiple times, the manufacturer can't price right away. One, the political system often intervenes. In my experience, almost always. They don't price. The second thing is, and then so it's hidden in incentives or less financing or changing in lease policy, something there, or definitely parts. But then the next thing is, well, slow changes in the pricing, because the plants are fixed. Going back to, it's like airplanes or hotels. The facilities are there. And often in the auto industry, the labor is there as well. So you're going to pay them anyway. Nobody wants the first one to raise the prices and the competition doesn't move. Your plant is empty, the other guy is full, and you are stuck. So it's this inching forward of tariff recovery is what I would expect to see. And that is still the industry between the suppliers and the OEMs. They've eaten all the tariffs. Barely anything has passed through to you guys, as you saw yesterday or a couple days ago. So I think that's coming to come through. We haven't even got to the next 5 months of EV dark years. This is oh my gosh, the news hype hasn't even happened at the end of this month, when it'll be the first month post 7,500. The EV sales are way down and everybody gets to bang the drum that this is the end of EVs in the US forever. There's like Then this will happen a couple more months. Then there'll be first quarter earnings. Oh, look at the results on EVs. It's a disaster. And then there'll be more noise. So there's like 6 months of hype cycle to go before all this changes. And because the manufacturers who were selling EVs at a loss for emissions reasons don't have to, well, then you would expect them to raise prices. Well, I might take less loss. I'm going to raise the price to recover that because I don't need it for credit reasons or emissions compliance.
The trough of disillusionment is a tough place to be in, as Gardner
If you're in
would
the
say.
business, hold, survive for that period of time.
Yeah.